Our next speaker, who is Jennie Brassington. So Jennie is a Senior Director of Consultative Services for Scholastic Education and a founding partner for the Centre of Active Family Engagement. She has more than 25 years of experience working with pre-K-12 schools as an administrator, early childhood coordinator and a school counsellor to improve student achievement and build effective family-school partnerships that support student learning. She most recently served as the Director of Family and Community Engagement for Accelero Learning, a large Head Start grantee with delegate agencies in 4 states. Welcome, Jennie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is this my clicker right here? So as my good friend Karen said, I didn't dress appropriately. So I get to carry this around today because I don't really have anywhere to put it. So hopefully I'm not causing too much noise. So it's wonderful to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. And I don't like standing there, so I'm going to try to walk around a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you about how do we actually implement what Karen talked about? What are those practices to actually put the dual capacity framework into your everyday work? So that's what we're going to talk about today, the reality of actually implementation and execution. So the work I do at Scholastic now, I work with schools and districts around the country. And they come to training, we talk about the dual capacity framework, we talk about these strategies, and I think they leave the training and wahoo, they go and they implement because that's what we do, right? However, how many of you go to a conference, you go to a training, you're pumped up, right? You're ready. What happens? So the reality, this is the reality, right? This is the reality. It's the unfortunate reality of training, right? You attend a conference, you attend a training, you're super pumped, right? How many of you get super pumped? Right? Okay. You're ready to implement. But then you go back, right? You go back to your school, you go back to your district, you go back to your site, and all of a sudden, reality hits, right? The reality of every day, the reality of those emergencies, the reality of, I'm not really sure how to do this well, right? I took a bunch of notes. How many of you have ever written those notes, you go back to read them, and you're like, I'm not sure what I actually wrote. Okay, so that's me. And the worst one is those old habits, right? That if you don't have actually somebody supporting you or coaching you, what happens? You fall back into those old habits. Not that it would ever happen to me. So the application is actually pretty low. And then the cycle continues. Okay, so if there's not implementation support or coaching, and if you don't plan for that ahead of time, then training in PD actually is really merely just a vacation away from our daily responsibilities, right? Because the reality is that we all need support. We all need the coaching to actually put this into practice, okay? So, this is my reality. So, I'm an inherent lazy person. I would lay in bed. Like, in fact, I looked at your program that I got, and I was super excited about those 6:30 walk, 6 o'clock walk? How many of you saw me this morning? Because that's me in my bed. I'm not an early morning person. I wasn't getting out of bed, right? I live for my TV shows. I am like addicted to those shows. And I live for like sweet, like I am like a sugar hound. So without my coach and somebody like helping to support me, I fall into all those really, really bad habits, okay? So what I'm here to say today and to talk to you about is what we heard from the schools and the districts that we were working with. And so now when we do our trainings, there's always these two things that are like part of it, is the implementation support and the coaching. Because otherwise, the schools are really, it's hard for them to put it into practice. They need that coach, they need the support. What happens next? And some of the simple things, like I remember when I was teaching, and the thing that I used to say all the time in my parent-teacher conferences, just read with your child, read with your child, read with your child. But the things that I said, I knew what I meant, right? But actually, did my families actually know that? So some of the things that Karen talked about seem so simple. But for the folks that are actually doing this for the first time, they needed those concrete examples. What does it look like? Show me, tell me, help me, model it for me. So that's what we came up with. So, and I believe we're providing this for you, so you should have this. But this is about turning knowledge into action. So based on the framework, thank you, Karen, we developed an observation checklist and rubric so that you could actually begin to see what are you actually going for? What does that quality practice look like? And when you know you're on the right track. So I'm going to talk about the rubric first. And we started the work that we were doing. We have a family engagement series based on Karen's work. It's called the Dr. Map series. It's a 3-part series. And the first folks that we trained was New York City, 120 schools. And when they were done, they said to us, now what? Who's going to help us actually do this, implement this? And so they actually helped us with creating the rubric. So this is what the rubric looks like. It's a process conditions rubric, and it shows folks exactly concrete examples of what it looks like if you're meeting sort of the expectations or you haven't. So the first part of the rubric is, you haven't met them. You haven't met those expectations. You're sort of almost there. You're on that right track. You're moving in the right directions. And then the last column is sort of, you nailed it. That's really where you want to go, okay? So there's concrete examples. Ability to assess those quality practices. So what we heard from the schools and districts was they didn't really know what those quality practices look like, what those concrete examples, what should they be doing? And so we've provided a list for them. How do you monitor progress over time? How do you know whether when you're actually doing this, are you improving, right? Are you getting better? It increases reliability and reduces bias, so everybody is on the same page. So if you were to assess, you know exactly what you're supposed to be looking for. And now there's a common definition of what quality practice looks like. So if I observe somebody doing an event at one school and I go to compare it at another school, I'm not saying, well, that school's better. We all have the same common language of what we mean when we say, under relational, when you nail it, what does that quality practice look like? We all have that same language. There's a developmental path to achieve mastery. So we're all not at the same place. Some of our teachers are very skilled at this, and some, this is brand new. So it gives you a place, a starting point, and now you know where you need to grow, okay? Staff take ownership. So I now know what it looks like. So I know what I'm shooting for. So if you tell me you want me to now implement a family engagement event or initiative at a very high quality, I now know what you mean in terms of linked to learning or interactive or developmental versus service-oriented. What do you mean by that? What are those practices that actually you want me to implement? And now you can target areas of strength and maybe areas that require more skill development in your staff. So what are the things we're really doing well? And what are the things that maybe require a little bit more support for individuals and for a school as a whole? Okay? So that's the rubric. And now you can see here is a little bit better shot of it. So each of the process conditions we've spelled out. And you can see when we look at, say, relational, those characteristics or those behaviors and actions that you may do that really you haven't really met that yet. And when you're sort of almost there, and when you've really nailed it, those quality practices that you're aiming for. So in each of the process conditions, we've given concrete examples of behaviors and actions so that you know exactly what you're shooting for. What does mastery actually look like? And then we work with educators to say, how are you planning for this? So when you're thinking about your events and your initiatives, think about it with the end in mind. If you actually implemented these at a quality level, took a look at the rubric, what would you expect educators, what would you be doing? What would you be doing under relational? What would you be doing interactive? What would your practices look like? And what would you expect, what would you see and hear from your families? And get folks to actually articulate that out so that you can go back and then measure, did I see this? So what's the next step? So the next step is actually coaching. And when I started this, this coaching work about 5 years ago, I started it at Oscillero. And I remember the family engagement staff looked at me and they said, coaching? You don't coach us. Only teachers get coached. You're observing us? And I said, yes, we're going to observe. And you know what? We're actually going to videotape you. We're going to videotape your practices. And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And they said, you're going to videotape us? Isn't it just teachers you videotape? And I said, well, that's typically what you think, but your practices are just as important. How you engage with families, those quality practices are just as important as a teacher engaging their instructional practices with students. We can observe your practices just as easily as we can with teachers. So it was when staff started in with Oscillero, it was a given that they were going to be observed and videotaped, just like our teachers. And so that's something I want you to think about, that the coaching that we provide our teachers and our educators, we should be providing our family engagement staff. And the coaching of the coaches that we provide for our instructional staff should be just the same for our family engagement staff. So you have the rubric, now what do you do with it? So you provide some coaching and some observations around your family engagement events. So just something to think about in terms of the coaching aspect and why it's so important. So this is from Joyce and Chowers. If you look at training components in terms of theory, demonstration, practice, feedback, and coaching, coaching gets the highest in terms of the transfer of learning. And without that, it's really hard to implement and put things into practice. Everybody needs a coach. So this is what our reflective coaching cycle looks like. We observe, we pick an event. It's an event, an initiative, or a strategy. We then reflect on it, and I'm going to show you the tool that we use. It's part of the rubric. We analyze the data. Staff that actually implemented the event will do their own self-assessment. Then we meet and do a post-conference. How many of you are teachers in the room? How similar does this sound to some of the things you go through? Right? Exactly the same. And then we plan. So what are the things maybe that we want to focus on for the next time? And then we'll set a new focus. What are the things that your coach or somebody should look for in the next time? And so that's the reflective coaching cycle. So it's intentional. So in terms of our family engagement events, we're not just saying, checking the box off and saying, yes, we did our family engagement event. We're now looking to see, was it a quality event? And did we put into practice the things that we know are the things that we want in terms of building families' capacity? So it's not enough anymore to just say, yep, our families came, yep, we did the event. But now we can go back and say, was this a quality event? And if not, what are the things we want to improve upon? So this is the observation tool. It's aligned to the rubric. And you can decide to just focus on maybe one of those areas of the rubric. So maybe on this occasion you just want to focus on the link to learning, and you just want to see how closely is your event, your strategy, your initiative, how close is it aligned to learning. Maybe you want to look at both link to learning and collaborative. It's really up to you. Maybe one of you wants to focus on link to learning and another one wants to focus on collaborative. But this is your observational tool. So you can now look and observe and see, are these things actually happening? Okay? I would also strongly suggest you then videotape it so that staff can go back and then watch and see what they did and how they implemented and executed the event. You also now have something to talk about with staff after an event. You have something to debrief on, right? Here are the things that I saw. We also have staff complete this themselves. So based on the rubric, based on their planning, did these things actually happen? Okay? So in terms of how to use the tool, so you choose an event, you determine what to observe, you take good narrative notes, diagrams, pictures. Again, we oftentimes use video, and we tell schools to do that. And then staff will reflect on their own practices, and then we debrief. And then you can determine the conditions that staff consistently implement at a really high level, and the ones where you need additional support. And we've used this with schools and districts now in about 4 different places. Districts are now using these to go in when they have an event. They're using the rubric to pre-plan. And they find now that schools have a better sense or a better idea of, when we talk about the process conditions, what it actually means to implement these things at a very high level. So 2 things to remember, that training and implementation support go hand in hand. That without the implementation support, that actually moving this work forward is challenging for schools. They need that coach. They need somebody in their corner to actually say, well, you talked about this in your plan, you said you were going to do this, but when I actually went to the event, this is what we saw. Or I'm not actually sure what it means for interactive, or I don't know actually what it means for something to be asset-based, or some of the language that you continue to use is this. And so if you don't have somebody actually supporting or watching for these things, it's hard to actually know whether you're actually doing quality family engagement practices. So the rubric has helped schools and districts know, 1, what to focus on, what to shoot for, and what it is they need to focus on. And 2, I would say observations and reflective coaching conversations are not just for teaching staff. That we have to get into this habit of professionalizing our family engagement staff, and so that means we observe, we coach them. And so this is one of the ways we do that. We also have a rubric for our family engagement staff, and we have coaching sessions and a coaching of the coaching model. So I guess I went quicker than I was supposed to. So, okay, all right. If you want more information on the work we're doing around the rubrics, you can email me, and I think we've provided you a copy of the rubric, and I think our parent coordinator rubric as well. So, yeah. I guess I talk fast. Yeah, I'm staying here.